Candyman 4, also called Candyman, apparently introduced the idea that Candyman wasn't a single vengeful spirit, but something else. Multiple murder spirits. A hive, if you want to be clever. But this isn't a new idea. And I'm not actually thinking about Helen becoming Cabrini Green's patron spirit at the end of the first film. The intention there was that she supplanted Candyman and replaced him. But after 4, the obvious thing is to retcon her into one of the hive. Now what I'm talking about is how in the original Candyman trilogy there were clearly 2 different Candymen floating about, monologuing sonorously and killing people. As I mentioned in my video about the Forbidden Candyman, in The Forbidden, the original short story the films were based on, the Candyman isn't a vengeful ghost, it's a gestalt built out of the beliefs and fears of the desperate community it haunts. For example, the hook hand comes from the urban legend about a hook-handed killer. The origin about the artist son of a slave who was tortured and killed didn't happen. Partially because he wasn't an artist, he wasn't the son of a slave, he wasn't even black, hell he wasn't even human, and there was no text, sub or otherwise, about racism. That was all added by Bernard Rose for the first film. Candyman's origin was explained in the first film by escaped Doctor Who, Philip Purcell.
I mean, you do know the story, don't you?
No.
And he explains that the Candyman's murder took place in Cabrini Green, Chicago.
They chased Candyman through the town to Cabrini Green.
The set of the projects that he haunts, and he's been believed in ever since. But the second film explains that the real-life Candyman, Daniel Robitaille, actually lived and died in New Orleans.
Robitaille was born right here in New Orleans.
I know.
So what's going on? Simple, I think the Cabrini Green Candyman is like the Forbidden. Desperation and fear given flesh. And the New Orleans version, seen in Farewell to the Flesh and Day of the Dead, is the actual vengeful spirit of Daniel Robitaille. I think in the wake of Robitaille's murder and subsequent haunting, someone visited from Illinois and brought the story back to Chicago and told it.
The myth has travelled from place to place, taking root in the most desperate areas.
And it grew into the living story seen in 1 and 4. Now, there are a number of details changed between 1 and 2, such as Candyman gaining the name Daniel Robitaille and the location of his murder changing, which are retcons, but they actually make sense in universe. In 1, Purcell, the most notable expert in Candyman, had only written a paper on him, but by the time 2 had come out, he had literally written the book on him. So clearly, much more information had come to light by then. All this actually explains a minor plot hole in Farewell to the Flesh. Purcell is a reading for his Candyman book in New Orleans. He gives the origin and says Candyman 5 times in a mirror, and a few minutes later he's murdered. Now this is part of his book tour, saying Candyman 5 times is a bit he does. He even introduces that night's Candyman.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet our Candyman, Peter.
So this is clearly not the first time he's done this, and yet this time he's killed. Why? Because this time, he did it on Robitaille's turf. Hell, I'm sure he probably did the 5 times in a mirror thing off screen in Chicago. Because look at him, of course he did. And yet he survived. Why? Because he didn't believe that Candyman was real.
Do I believe in Candyman? I believe in the myth. But the fact, the flesh and blood, no.
The Candyman in 1 and 4 can only be summoned if you believe in him on some level, because he's a thing of belief. While the Candyman in 2 and 3 is your common or garden angry ghost with a flair for the dramatic, and he will kill you whether you believe or not. The Candyman, being different things, explains the difference in the focus of the films too. 1 and 4 are more intellectual, more esoteric, more ambiguous. They reach for something more interesting than the average slasher. While 2 and 3 are more human, more traditional slasher movie fare, more connected to Robitaille as a man, and ultimately much more stupid. For example, the Cabrini Green version, seen 1 and 4, needs raw belief to exist.
Tell everyone.
While the New Orleans one, seen in 2 and 3, is powerful objects, a mirror and a painting. Candyman 1 and 4 are about racism, societal neglect, and generational pain, while 2 and 3 are about a rich white family desperately trying to escape their black ancestry. Even the outfits that Candyman wears line up with this theory. In 1, his outfit is stylized, and with the obvious fur slightly evoking a pimp. It's as if generations of people and their ideas have left their mark on his look. The New Orleans version has 2 looks. One drops the fur and is just a 19th century suit and coat, and the other is a much subtler and less showy fur, as though he's wearing real fashions from when he died. A very minor bit of evidence that the two aren't the same thing, but still interesting, is the timing between 3 and 4. Because they don't really draw attention to it, but 3 actually takes place a year after 4. So if they are all the same entity, then we're to believe that for a short time, the Candyman took on multiple guises, including going to the bother of getting a new one in Anthony McCoy, but went right back to being Tony Todd obsessed with his descendants again. I suppose it's possible that's what's happened here, but it really feels like someone's off living their best life, being a hive of serial killing concepts, but then they get a phone call from their estranged family through a mirror, and they're expected to drop everything, go home and try to fuck their great-granddaughter. It technically works, it's much funnier than my theory, but I really don't think that's what's going on here. Anyway, long story short, Candyman 4 explains that the Candyman at Cabrini Green has been absorbing the appearances of people brutally killed and is using them as guises to scare the community. And the Tony Todd version is just one of many. Hell, it might not even be the first. And this isn't a retcon, not really, it was clumsily and accidentally set up all the way back in Candyman 2, when the producers replaced Bernard Rose with a creative team out to make something much more generic than the first Candyman. Something much more generic that completely changed the tone, setting and drive of the story. And as a result, we end up with 2 distinct Candyman. The Hive from parts 1 and 4, and the Vengeful Ghost from parts 2 and 3.